Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And welcome to the Young Professionals Summit of the International Road Federation. And we're actually online right now from Geneva. And welcome. We will be having three wonderful sessions with about 12 speakers on board. And we'll be discussing about three specific areas, which is going active, going electric, and going autonomous. And let's not keep you waiting, and let's start the ball rolling. So we will have our preliminaries, and it will be discussed to us by our Deputy Director General in the IRF, Gonzalo Alcaraz. Gonzalo?
Thank you, Ray.
Hi,
Thank you
Gonzalo.
for the introduction, and welcome everyone for this new edition of the Young Professionals Summit. We are actually on the third time doing this, so I'm glad, I'm very happy to be with all of you today. Let me just give you a brief introduction to what the IRF is for those who might not be fully aware of our activities. So Ray, please move to the next slide. So IRF is a membership-based organization. We are based in Geneva, Switzerland, and we were created in 1948 after the Second World War in a way to help with the reconstruction of Europe at the time. We operate globally, so we are independent as well. And we have been collaborated with the United Nations under a consultative status since 1951, so since a long time. Our organization basically assists public and private stakeholders, also academia and civil society organizations on roads and mobility sectors in more than 130 countries of the world. If we need to summarize our pillars of activities, those are knowledge for first, where we engage with our members and our partners on sharing and exchanging knowledge, either through capacity building activities or through the preparation and writing of documents, position papers, and books in some cases. Second pillar of activities is our network. Of course, operating at this scale, we have connections at every level in most of the countries around the world. And we incentivize these networking activities through the development of events, such as the one that we're doing today, but also other type of events, even in collaboration with partners. But at the same time, we create one-to-ones or bilateral meetings with whoever is part of our network in order to connect them with their relevant peers or whoever they need in order to progress in their line of business. Last point on the activities is our advocacy work, of course, related to mainly road safety on one side, and on the other side, sustainable development of roads and roads networks. I know the time is limited, so I want to just conclude by inviting you to our conference, actually, that is happening next week in Marrakesh in Morocco on the 6th. So it will be next Thursday. It's an annual retreat where basically we engage with some of our partners and our members as well. And the conference this year is going to be focused on sustainable mobility, which is one of the topics I just mentioned before as our advocacy work. On top of that, we are also organizing an online training on Planet for Autonomous Mobility, which I know also is one of the topics of today's event. So I invite you also to check that. I will put on the chat the links for these two main activities. And I will be happy to see some of you on these initiatives, and I hope you manage to be there. And I want to close my brief intervention by saying that this is also a first for me. It's the first time I'm sitting down in an event. I'm the oldest person in the room, and but that's a room for some thinking afterwards. But I'm glad that we can provide with you guys younger generations and younger professionals the possibility to engage with other peers, exchange ideas, knowledge, whatever you think is worth sharing. And this is the platform to be. And I hope we are going to repeat this event for the years to come and eventually have this type of event physically as well in our World Congress in Istanbul that is going to take place in 2024. Without further ado, Ray, I pass the word back to you. And I want to thank again now for the organizers, you, Ray, Shashank, Tendekai, and Frederick for organizing this event. And I wish you the best for the rest of the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And actually, I probably owe you a lot because this has been a big opportunity for me and for the rest of us in the IRF Young Professionals, especially the leadership team. And yes, you're the oldest in the room. So before we start with the actual program proper, I'll be sharing with you also what the IRF Young Professionals program is all about. And I'm also introducing myself. I'm Ray Adrian Macalalag, and I'm actually the IRF Young Professional Lead for East Asia and Pacific. And I'm also currently the Senior Economic Development Specialist of the National Economic and Development Authority here in the Philippines. So this will also be as short as the presentation of Gonzalo because we want the meat of the summit to be in the highlight as well. So the IRF Young Professionals Program is a prestigious global network of young leaders and specialists in the road and mobility sector to propose initiatives, share ideas, and engagement with the overall activities of the IRF. So as you've seen earlier, there were 3 pillars of the work of IRF, and the IRF Young Professionals Program also has these 3 pillars. So inspiration, socialization, and advocacy. For inspiration, of course, this event is actually one of the most important things for inspiration because in here we have young professionals share their ideas and we're also exchanging our ideas wherein we can practice this in our respective countries, whatever classification we have and whatever profession we have, then we are trying to inspire to make a very good mobility network for everyone. And also for the socialization side, this is actually more of an offline kind of thing because the socialization part is actually on the coordination of the young professionals as part of the program, wherein they can also collaborate if ever they would need collaborators. So we also support that. And lastly, of course, advocacy. So yes, we also advocate on certain things, and these are actually reflected on the theme that we are having in this Young Professionals program. So this is actually the 3rd one of among the Young Professionals Summit. And last year we had green mobility. Now we are leaning towards the new trends as we are also entering the new normal. So what are the benefits of the membership in the IRF Young Professionals program? So of course, you'll be part of a prestigious network of like-minded young individuals and IRF associates. And it's also an opportunity to participate in IRF activities and events. That's why Gonzalo earlier invited you to join the activity of IRF next week in Morocco. So hopefully to those friends we have that has the resources and also is just near Morocco, then maybe you could also visit and join the activity of the IRF there. And also we are actually giving a platform to publish articles in the World Highways, the official magazine of the International Road Federation, as in other specialized publications. And we're also giving the unique chance to be part of the IRF's Ideas Lab and help shape the future of the road and mobility sectors. Now, in case you're wondering how you could join, so we just have these 3 basic requirements. So first is the age requirement for us. Well, you must be between 22 to 35 years old at the time of membership application. And for experience, you must be a graduate or a young professional in the road and mobility sector, emphasizing the sector's multidisciplinary characteristic. All professionals contributory to the goals of the program are also welcome. So we're not just welcoming engineers and those who are directly working on road construction, but we're also into other fields like even psychologists, for example, who will be studying on the behavior of road users. You're pretty much welcome to join us. And also for other skills, you must be able to demonstrate leadership skills and proactivity. And also members are expected to contribute in the development and implementation of the IRF Young Professional activities, such as this. So the leadership theme for 2021 to 2022 are the following. So it's actually been our second year in the term, and I am very happy that we did brave the challenges of being just connected online. We haven't even met each other yet, but we've developed a great friendships along the way. So Tendekai Marapara, who is from Zimbabwe, he is the IRF YP secretary, and yours truly as the IRF YP lead for East Asia and the Pacific. We also have Shashank Misra from India, who is the IRF YP lead in Asia. And also with us is Frederick John, who is from Belgium and is the IRF YP lead for the Europe and Americas. So we are actually welcoming everyone who's joining this webinar to actually join the Young Professionals program. And if you are interested, you can see there the link below. So if you're interested, you may express your intent in joining by emailing youngpp@irfnet.ch. And on the chat box later on, we will also share the link to the actual membership form. So that's a very brief introduction of the IRF YP program. But if you have more inquiries, you can just email us. So we have to get the ball rolling already. I must have been taking so much time. So I'll be now turning over you to my colleague and friend, Tendekai Marapara, who will now take over for the going active portion of the IRF YP Summit. So Tendekai, how are you there?
Hello, Ray. How are you? Good to see you.
Yes,
Greetings, everyone.
Everything is fine here, and I hope everyone is.
Thank you so
So
much.
go
Ray.
ahead, Tendekai.
Thank you so much, Ray. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our third edition of the IRF Young Professionals Summit. Ray has already introduced me. I'm Tendekai. I'm joining you from Harare, Zimbabwe, and I'm a civil engineer specializing in transportation safety. So I welcome you all to this event. We cannot talk about emerging future mobility trends responsive to the climate challenges in sustainability without talking about going active. Going active simply means going physical, and some say you become your own engine. We see that the other part of the world is shifting from personal car dependence to walking and cycling, and the other part is actually going in the opposite direction, shifting from walking and cycling to increased car ownership. As young professionals, will this help us in cutting down transport emissions and meet our global targets, or we'll continue seeing more air pollution, deaths, traffic deaths increasing on the other side of the world, whilst decreasing on the other side of the world? I don't know. What does the future hold? I don't know. So as young professionals in the transport industry, are we doing enough? Are we cycling to work? Are we walking to work? Are we doing our best? Are we not part of the statistic contributing to transport emissions? Believe me or not, young professionals, we are the key drivers for change. So now let's hear from our first speaker, Allen Goosen. Allen Goosen works for PTV as a mobility specialist, business development based in Dubai. He's also responsible for technical sales, business development, delivery management for the PTV software solutions, as well as handling project proposals within the region of the Middle East and as well as Africa and India. With his experience in the transportation field, Allen also specializes in road safety and advocates for safer, sustainable road. I'll give the floor to Allen. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tendiaki. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alain Hussein. I'm a mobility specialist at PTV Group. So now, first of all, I would like to thank the IRF for having me here, and I'm going to try to wrap it up within the time limit. So now moving on, what we're going to discuss in this presentation is a very important factor that is often left aside when planning for a sustainable city, and it is road safety. So we will be discussing the relationship that road safety plays between sustainability and climate change. So first of all, we're going to discuss about how road safety plays an important role between sustainable cities and climate change. After that, we're going to ask the question of, will going electric fully solve the problem? I guess we're going to have to find out. And then we're going to tackle the role that road safety plays on affecting the economical growth within the cities. And finally, we will be discussing the relationship that is there between sustainable cities and climate change. So moving on to our first topic, can a city where pedestrians, cyclists, and children get injured or killed on the roads be truly a sustainable one? Of course, the answer is never. So given the rapid urbanization of the world's population, road safety is a critical development and sustainability issue. So nowadays, the interest in the effect of the climate change is being addressed due to its effect being visible to the world, and humans start to feel it in their everyday lives, from floods to droughts, severe weather conditions, and everything in between. I'm sure you've seen this number a lot. So over 1 million people are killed in traffic crashes every year. So road crashes are the biggest killer of children in young adults aged between 5 and 24 years old. So their impact, especially in poorer communities, it can be devastating. So for sure, to have a sustainable city, one of the factors is the reduction of the carbon emission from vehicles. Hence, we need to have more people walking and cycling or using the public transportation. But if it's very dangerous for them, they will not be able to do it, and they will take the easy way out, which is the private vehicle alternative. So we must think about road safety as this factor that enables cities to be more sustainable and more livable. So as we say, road safety is a collective responsibility, and each one of us is responsible. Moving on, we're going to ask this famous question, which is, will going electric fully solve our problem? Of course not. This is the answer. But it is a mandatory step towards lowering the CO2 emissions coming from vehicles running on fuel. So we should be aware that going electric saves us a percentage of the fuel emission that is not only the ultimate solution to accommodate. However, it will help us to win a battle against the climate change, but not the war. So I would like to share with you here a picture that that I saw actually on social media not a long time ago, and it is very relatable to our topic right now. So as much as this is a solution to tackle the CO2 emission and fight the climate change, 48 vehicles on the road, whether they run on fuel, electricity, or happen to be autonomous, they are still 48 vehicles on the roads. So they have the same effect on crash occurrence and road safety for other vulnerable users. So we cannot have a sustainable city with crowded roads. So in a sustainable city, people who have a necessity to use a private vehicle will be using the electric car. However, while others who have the luxury of choosing between using a public transportation mode or a private car should definitely choose the public transportation. So moving on, I'm gonna add the relationship of road safety within the economical growth. So we have here the relationship between road safety and the economic growth of the city itself. So in fact, one of the traits of the sustainable city is to have a growing economy. So what favors this growth is allowing the citizen to commute to their desired trips, which eases the mobility and business within the city itself. So if the citizen will see that commuting to this business trip will put his life in danger on poor engineered roads, whether he decides to go by walk or by car, or regardless of the mode of transportation that he will be choosing, he will simply choose not to go. And after that, I'm going to tackle the relationship between sustainable cities and the effect that they have on the climate change. Now, cities are a key contributor to the climate change, as urban activities are major sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Estimates suggest that cities are responsible for 75% of the global CO2 emissions, with transport and buildings being amongst the largest contributors. Now, only with a coordinated approach and action to the global, regional, national, and local levels can success be achieved. It is essential, therefore, to make cities an integral part of the solution in fighting the climate change. Many cities are already doing so by using renewable energy sources, cleaner production techniques, and regulations or incentives to limit the industrial emissions. And also, cutting emission will reduce the local pollution from industries and transport, thus improving the air quality and the health of city dwellers. Now, if we had more time, I would be discussing more examples, but one of the examples of sustainable cities that is booming right now is Neom the Line, which is being built in Saudi Arabia. Now, it focuses on the absence of roads, cars, and emissions, and it will run on 100% renewable energy, and 95% of land will still be preserved for nature. So people's health and well-being will be prioritized over the transportation and infrastructure, and not to forget the reduced infrastructure footprint that it's being built on. So all of these specifications are factors that define a sustainable city. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alan, for the great presentation. You brought up a very important point, linking active travel to sustainable cities, and also emphasizing on road safety. We cannot say or encourage people to travel whilst they don't feel safe, whilst the roads are still killing lots of people per year, hundreds, millions of people. So I think what we all need is to take action and be the agent of change. So our next speaker is Harry Maxwell. Harry is the head of marketing and lead for European Shared Mobility Index. He also worked for the bike manufacturer 15. Over to you, Harry.
Thanks, Tendikai. Unfortunately, I think I have a problem when I share my screen. It disables my microphone, which isn't ideal. Is there any chance you could skip on to the next person and then I fit in number 3 while I sort this problem out?
That's okay. That's okay. that's okay. Thank you. Thank you for notifying us. So I'll quickly jump to our next speaker, which is Job.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I'll jump to Job. So Job is an innovation manager at International IT System Integrator Technolution. Job is responsible for managing the Technolution mobility and innovation roadmaps. He is actively involved in international innovation proposals and dynamic interactive mobility management and smart grid energy management. Job has been in the steering board of the ERTICO Traffic Management 2.0 innovation platform since 2016. Job, we are very glad to be having you on this platform. All is set for you.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to get involved, and I hope to share with you why I think young professionals in this domain are very much needed as an active voice. So I hope that you can see my screen today. I'll be talking a bit about a paradigm shift that I'm seeing in urban traffic management, urban mobility management, where a lot of public and private organizations are working on with all challenges involved. And I think there's a large need for new insights, new inspiration, and young leaders to make that shift happen. So I'm Job Spolstra, I'm Innovation Manager for Technolution. Technolution is known in the domain for making data platforms for traffic management centers and all kinds of technical solutions for mobility management throughout Europe and in the US specifically. And we made a transition as a company in relation to the mobility domain that made the transition as well. So in roughly 2000, the year 2000, we started out with a traffic management platform for the Traffic Management Center of Rotterdam, very much focused on managing cars throughout the city. And since then, we've made quite a transition in traffic management software where all modes in especially urban areas are getting involved, truly getting involved, how to balance them all in a dynamic, livable city. So we do this now throughout Europe, Scandinavia, and also in the US, in San Francisco, for example. And this adds to, so we have been adding micro mobility sensors to understand how how pedestrians and cyclists go about in the city. If we don't have any real-time information, we edit simulators to simulate how cyclists and other micromobility modes go about in the city. We have digital signs available to show all kinds of advices towards these different active modes in how to choose their routes, for example. But adding to that as well, dynamic priority to buses and trams when they reach an intersection and they are delayed on their schedule, for example, giving them additional green time so they can pick up on their schedule. We've been working on Geofence Policy, so pedestrian zones, zero emission zones that a government can draw into a virtual map and then communicate this towards all kinds of vehicles and all kinds of actuators around in the city. And also, apart from road traffic management, involving this with the maritime, the waterway management, and all the crosses in between. So when you open a bridge, the boats can go through, but maybe an ambulance has to wait. So how to make those balances. When we talk about active mobility specifically, there's been quite a change where we also have been a part of. So up until recently, traffic management was very much focused on car-centric traffic management. So it was very important that people by car could reach the city center in an easy way. They don't have a lot of congestion and they have an easy travel time. Based on policies with very generic KPIs. So a term known in the Netherlands is a vehicle loss hour. So an hour that a vehicle is lost in traffic congestion is a lost hour, but of course only for vehicles, so not cyclists, pedestrians, and all the other modes incorporated. Very much static. So a lot of times the configurations of the traffic lights don't have a morning rush hour configuration, for example, but it's just the same throughout the day, and almost only limited to larger corridors. And I think it shows also in the plates that you can buy for Lego, that over time, the plates for these roads have become wider and wider to give more space to the car. Well, things have changed in the meantime. So now traffic management, and I think we'll hear a lot about that today as well, is very much focused on truly multimodal traffic management. So understanding what all these different active modes are doing, pedestrians, cyclists, e-scooters, what have you in the city, how these people go about and how to incorporate them in the configuration of your city. Very much specific policy KPIs. So, for example, around primary schools for different modes. So travel time for cyclists and for cars and for buses and all these different modes. Multi-dimensional KPIs as well. So I want a low travel time for cars unless the air quality is too bad during working days, because then the schools are out, for example. So these different dimensions in one policy KPI. Very much dynamic, so they can change around when, for example, large-scale events in the city happen. Then the traffic plans reconfigure the assets in the city, and very much on micro level. So also in the smaller streets, also on cycling lanes, also in parks, you understand what mobility dynamics are. In relation to active mobility specifically, so when I focus on that, there are quite some new challenges where we cannot just copy paste all the things that we've known for cars in history and add them to cyclists and pedestrians and think it'll all work out. So we really have to reevaluate, why do these people travel by bicycle, for example? So this is not just to go quickly from A to B, but might also be because it's nice weather, because I want to have the kids out, stuff like that. How to measure them, because these bicycles and these other modes don't have a license plate. They're not large, chunky pieces of metal. How to predict them, because they're very dynamic. An e-scooter goes way faster than an elderly person on a bicycle. And also how to guide them, because these modes are very much characterized by having the freedom to go about wherever you want. So a traffic light for a car user is very much a solution, because it reduces the chaos at an intersection. And for a cyclist, a lot of the time it's seen as an object where it doesn't allow them to go through, and it reduces their freedom. I can talk for hours on this, but specifically 3 pointers where I think we should focus on, and I need you as well in focusing on that. Improving the attractiveness of these modes, improving the reliability of travel times in cities for pedestrians, cyclists, and all these other active modes, and really understanding the dynamics of these new involved mobility patterns. So as a couple of examples on improving attractiveness, connecting a rain radar to the traffic management center. So when there's rain, we can reconfigure the traffic lights into having more green time for cyclists. However, some lessons in that implementation: accuracy is key. So you should only adapt the traffic lights where it is actually raining, and not on other traffic lights because you think it might be raining there and it's not. And also visibility is a thing, because you reach, as a user, you reach an intersection, you don't know why the light turns green and you don't really care, it's just green. So how to get people involved in what are all the reasons why your traffic light is turning green at the moment, and having this public communication involved that a city is actually implementing these solutions. So the others being differentiated city policy and mobility. So this is an example from Copenhagen, where they made very specific policies for cyclists, pedestrians, buses, and cars, all prioritizing them over different streets and trying to reduce their travel time over these specific streets. Where we went about in measuring these travel times for cyclists, trying to give them advice over these dynamic signs on which route to take to the city center. And also the government made it very clear to the citizens by using this graph that you see, real time on the internet. You could see what the current travel times were for these cyclists, and therefore being very transparent on if the investments actually worked out. So a couple of lessons there. Citizen involvement was very important. So what kind of advice do you actually want to see on these signs? And also reliably sensing these active modes without infringing upon their privacy is quite a challenge, because normally you would do this with cameras. And of course, then you're just filming people in public space, and that's a real issue. So this made us develop a flow cube. This is our micromobility sensor that only has these camera optics on the sensor itself. So using machine learning, all the privacy information gets reduced within a second. And you get all these, this is an example of the city of Groningen, where 30 of these sensors are laid. You can have a lot of these graphs on how do cyclists actually go about in my city, and how can I then adapt my infrastructure accordingly? And that's a very important first step in actually improving the mobility scheme. I won't be too much on these graphs, but I think the green one is a nice one. This is the day when the COVID measures in the Netherlands hit, and you could see a direct drop in cycling mobility in the city of Groningen in real time. So my general message to you is there's a real paradigm shift going on. It doesn't work to get our usual assumptions on cars and stick them to active modes. It really needs a new change of mindset on how to use these modes and promote them. And I think that's very much a role for young professionals to bring in those new insights and to challenge what we already had. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Job. I think very important topic. You really brought new points, whereby you were saying in order to promote active mobility, we need to understand active mobility dynamics in real time, prioritizing cyclists and pedestrians over different streets, which is a very important aspect in this subject of discussion. So thank you so much. Looking forward to having you in our panel discussion. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So I'll try to move to Harry. Harry, is all set on your side?
Hi guys, yeah, I'm just working on it. I think I need Job to stop sharing his screen before I can. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Job, for filling in for me there. I really appreciate it. I know it wasn't easy for you. 1 second. Are you able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay, 1 second. Still having issues with Zoom, unfortunately.
All right.
I don't know how you want to proceed with this. Sorry, guys.
All right. Yeah, I think Ray.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ray.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, I've eaten into a bit of my time already, so I'll just say speedily sorry to all of the other panelists for taking a bit of time. Yeah, I'm Harry. I'm English originally, but I work in France for a company called Fluctuo. And we believe that shared mobility is essential for building the greener cities, the more livable cities of the future. Next slide, please. So we're Europe's leading data aggregator. We were founded 3 years ago in 2019, and we're backed by a couple of the most renowned VCs in the mobility business. And we work with some of the key micro-mobility players as well. So companies like Lime, Avoy, Donkey Republic, and Felix. Next slide, please. I don't want to do a bit of a sales presentation because that's not what we're here for, but it's important for what I'm going to go on to say. We have a product called City Dive, which just allows us to see what's going on in the micromobility space all across Europe. So in around 180 cities or nearly 180 cities. And what it allows us to do is track the number of rides and vehicles that are active in micromobility and shared mobility ecosystems across Europe. Next slide. So what we're able to do when we compile all of this data is create this report on a quarterly basis called the European Shared Mobility Index. And I only joined Fluctuo 4 months ago, but it's something that we've done 6 editions of. The last edition actually was published earlier this month, and it's something that I took on when I arrived, and it's quite a big work because you have to condense all of the data from all of the services in every city across Europe, and you have to reach out to some individual operators to get some of their data to create the report. But what we've seen is, if we go to the next slide, that it's quite renowned in the media for being, like a detailed look at the data that's usually quite difficult to get hold of, because we know that sometimes operators can be quite guarded about their data, and also cities, because there's things to contend with, like competitiveness and things like this. But what we really want to do is we want to grow the size of the cake. We want to grow shared mobility because it's essentially something that's going to get us to reduce private car use, and also to reduce our carbon emissions, as the other 2 panelists were saying before. If we go to the next slide. We can skip this slide. So yeah, there's just three editions coming up for the rest of the year. So the report contains 22 cities in Europe. And this is just a broad picture, so you get to see the cities that we've monitored. And we can see that year over year, ridership is increasing. We noticed that there was a 49% increase in ridership between Q2 2022 and Q2 2021. And we also see that shared bikes is 40% of the total ridership of the shared mobility space. So that's station-based bikes, free-floating bikes, scooters, mopeds, and cars. And you see that free-floating bikes makes up 9% of these figures today. We also saw that 26% of the trip growth has come from station-based bikes, and we've seen an astonishing 185% increase in use of free-floating bikes. So I'm going to dive into a bit of why that is now, if we go to the next slide. So operators back bikes, that's basically the headline of the story in terms of the last 2 years. We can see that the key cities in Europe are Paris, Barcelona, and Milan. Paris and Barcelona, why? Because they have 2 of the largest bike sharing services in Europe, called Bising and Velib. In fact, if you include London Santander Cycles in that, Paris, Barcelona, and London account for 50% of all shared bike trips in the 22 cities monitored. So that's quite a big number. In the last 6 months, though, we also saw 20,000 free-floating bikes hit the streets, And that is notably why Prague, Warsaw, and Munich have experienced such a big growth in trips between January and March, and then compared to April and June of this year. Next slide, please. So how did we get to this point? We in 2017, our streets in Europe were overrun with bikes that were not necessarily ready to be shared. These bikes that were made quickly, and they were thrown on the streets to get a few cheap rides before they were finally discarded, to suddenly now, like the bikes that we're seeing on the right-hand side with Dot, obviously very well built and suitable for sharing, and they're really contributing to more cities that actually move in the way that we want them to. Next slide, please. So how did we get there? Well, the most obvious thing is that the VC money that was used for scooters for companies like Lime and Bird originally has allowed other top operators like Tier, Bolt, Voi to invest heavily in their R&D and to also buy vehicles that are more expensive, but they're more robust. So they're going to have a longer time on the streets, a longer life cycle, so that they can actually contribute to a sustainable mode of transport. Because of this money as well, they've been able to invest into a user experience that has that greatly surpasses what we see with the subsidized bike sharing services of traditional bike sharing cities. So the services that came around in about 2005 to 2012. And there's another big part of the shared mobility space, which is MaaS. So mobility as a service applications that help you to get from A to B. FreeNow, CityMapper, Kogo, companies like this, that really help facilitate multimodal journeys. So they help people get the bike that's going to take them to the station to complete that last mile, so they don't feel that they need to take their car to the station. And that's really, really important. And I think this is something that Ray was talking about, is, how do we see ourselves in the new normal, right? After COVID, there were tons of bike lanes that were created to help people get around to avoid public transport and things like this, when it was a public safety issue to have too many people in one place. And these COVID bike lanes helped, essentially, they stuck around after the pandemic, because they felt that they were actually going to contribute to society and remove private car use, and that's a great thing. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to draw attention now to a couple of the cities that we noticed in terms of the vehicle numbers over the past year or so, as to to show this growth of the free floating bike. So everything that I just talked about, the high user experience, the better vehicles, making people want to travel more, and it's contributing to what is a significant asset for cities to help people move around, as well as the station-based bike systems that they may well have as well. Next slide, please. In terms of station-based bikes, so I briefly mentioned about the traditional bike sharing schemes from 2005 to 2012 and how they've grown. So there's so much more money being given to active mobility, which is such an important thing. But aside from the money, what cities are learning is that the data that they can get from these trips can help them build and make better cities. So if they see that people are avoiding a certain road because there's no bike lane there, they'll be able to see that with the data, all the trips will be going around this road. And in fact, all that they need to do is build a cycle lane, and that will help people have safer trips, or maybe they view that there are more accidents on certain streets, etc. And they can use this data to really help promote active mobility in their cities. I mentioned comfortable vehicles already for the private side, but since there is more money to be had on the public side as well, with all of these grants, the added benefit for people is that with a bike sharing system, you have the flexibility of not owning. So it means that you can you don't have to pay every month to use a bike. You can pick it up whenever you want, whenever you need to. And instead of having, you know, a four-wheeled vehicle in your drive that you have to pay for and you have to get out all the time, you can decide to walk, you can decide to get public transport and use the bike where necessary. And that's obviously a great thing. And the other thing that's helping, the other reason why shared mobility is contributing to active mobility is because of a need for some people, actually. So cities becoming less car friendly, sorry. And what that means is that because of these new bike lanes that are coming in, the slowing of traffic, the giving right to pedestrians and to cycle users, it means that it's just simply quicker to take a bike or to use public transport than it would be to take your car. And this is all a great thing, and it contributes to more demand. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk about now is the Climate 100, which is the 100 cities in Europe that have said that they wanted to be climate neutral by, I think it's 2050, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe someone in the chat could tell me otherwise. But we estimate there are about 200,000 shared bikes in this Climate 100. And it's incredible because we found also that 21 of the EU members have committed 1.7 billion to cycling in 2022. So it really shows where the EU's their objective lies with cycling, and how they think they can achieve this goal is by betting on bikes. And one of the reasons why shared mobility is going to be a great thing for smaller cities is because of the advances in technology. So whereas before, when there were the free floating bikes scattered all over cities and parking was a challenge because they were blocking roads and things like this, technology has actually enabled operators and cities to understand where bikes are and where they're being parked, and to stop them from being parked in certain areas, which means that for smaller towns, they don't have to invest in the expenditure to build stations that people have to park at, but whereas they can just create geofence zones where these people can park, and they can create bike sharing systems for a lot cheaper than they could before. And below on the screen, this isn't part of the 1.7 billion, but I just found a couple of articles in the last couple of days that France have just launched a 250 million euro bicycle fund for 2023. And just one example of many is Lithuania expanding their bike pass by 5K by 2035. So these are huge things, and it's really good to see. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, just going talking about the future. As I said before, the technology is key to making bike sharing accessible to smaller towns. I think electric bikes are the most suitable alternative to the car, which is a really important thing to add. So I think it was, I can't remember who it was now. I think it was Tendikayi who was saying this at the start. You know, is it going to be, are people moving towards walking and cycling, or are they moving away from it? It's really interesting with shared mobility when we consider scooters. The point can be made between scooters benefiting society and, you know, saying that they are removing more CO2. But if you look at the average trip lengths, you might say that they're emitting more, because if a scooter trip is 3 kilometers long, it might be replacing more bike trips or more walking. But a bike trip, or a trip on an electric bike, for instance, I think the average length is around 7 kilometers. So what it's really doing is it's encouraging people to use a sustainable mode rather than a private car, which when they need to go longer distances. And this is a really crucial part of shared mobility. And I think bikes are the way forward for these longer journeys. I definitely think that scooters have their place in society. But I think in terms of the most impact on carbon emissions, this has to be the way to go. And finally, there's one news story that I saw this week that I wanted to talk about, because it gives it's a really interesting prospect when we talk about active mobility. This is partnerships that increase the adoption of shared modes. And I saw Strava this week had integrated all bike sharing systems into their platform. So this means that when you go for a run, or you go for a cycle, or go for a walk, you can actually see all these bike sharing systems in the city. And this one thing. It could help people, you know, take a shared bike to a park instead of take their car if they live in a rural area, things like this. But it could also help people actually get more active by using the bike sharing systems if they can't afford a bike. And this is the kind of initiative that we love to see, and I hope there are things like this that develop in the future. Next slide, please. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in the index, there's a QR code there. I hope it works. If it doesn't, just message me privately. I can share the index with you, but it's got some interesting insights in there, especially if you're interested in shared mobility in Europe. Once again, thank you very much, and sorry for the technical issues.
Thanks, Harry. I think it was a very fruitful discussion and presentation. So I really appreciated when you said without data, it's difficult for cities or decision makers to make better informed decisions. So with better data, there's better infrastructure, and which also is safe for all road users. And you also mentioned about the huge investment that cities involved in the climate 100 are willing to push, which is a very, very good thing. We cannot say we want to shift from private or vehicle ownership to active mobility without the putting the investment, sustainable investments around the whole issue. And also, so you also mentioned about e-bikes being an alternative to the car. I think that one makes a lot of sense, because there's longer trips, less sweating. You know, you cannot be like traveling if you want to sweat cycling to work. Thank you so much.
Arrive at work with a sweaty back. It's never ideal. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So our next speaker is John Joel. John Joel is an engineer currently working as an associate professor at Untitled Institute of Technology in the Philippines. He worked with the Department of Public Transport in the Department of as a highway traffic engineer, and has been involved in traffic safety engineering projects. Joel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tentekai. So let me share my screen. All right, so let me start. So good day and good evening here in the Philippines. I'm here to present and somehow provide an answer. What is the future of active transportation in developing cities? Since we are discussing about active transportation development in developed cities, so let's talk about this thing in developing cities like the Philippines. So here's the slide of my presentation, the outline rather. So according to study, based on the mobility trend of community, about 55% of the trips that we do are only short distance trips, which covers trips within a city or municipality. And while trips with distances ranging up to 5 kilometers or more, or these trips are intercity, interregional, or interprovincial, comprise of about 45% in total. And looking at this figure, it is ideal that these short distances can be served by active mobility or with the use of walking or bicycles, or with the use of our own energy. While 45% of the trips can be done with the use of motorized vehicles that are operated with the use of external energy like fuel and electricity. Thus, we can see the active transportation have the potential to deliver 55% of the trip demand that we require every day, which can lead us towards sustainable transportation. And let us talk now about the active transportation in sustainable cities, wherein some of the panel members or the speakers tonight have discussed. And let me define sustainable cities as the cities which follow the ideal hierarchy of transportation, or with modal share 55% for active transportation. And in Germany, for example, they followed the German National Cycling Plan, which started from 2002 to 2012. As we can see in the figure, the urban transportation focused on cycling as a system. And based on this, there are three key components. First is the hardware. These are the cycling infrastructure, such as cycle path that are safe, comfortable, and direct. And also these hardware components are the secured cycling parking facilities at establishments or offices. And also it ensures that the cycling infrastructure are interconnected with the public transportation to attract more cyclists to shift to active transportation. And the next component is the peripheral hardware, wherein these are the cycle stations, repair services, and cycle cleaning facilities. And lastly, software. And software deals with soft infrastructure that deals with the public information and education, which are linked to governance, which aims to change the behavior of the people, aiming to encourage and convince road users to shift from automobile transport to cycling and keep them from using it in the long run. And aside from Germany, Copenhagen is one of the champion cities known that plans, implement, maintain, and continuously innovate many things about these components: hardware, peripheral hardware, and software. And after talking about sustainable cities, let's move on to the other end of the world, wherein active transportation is also evolving in developing cities. So let me define developing cities as which are usually automobile dependent and more on passive mobility, with challenges in urban transportation, such as first, automobile dependence. Based on the study of Dr. Gatarin in 2020, Filipina, automobile dependence is a result of a cultural association of success in owning an automobile. Second is the lack of good level of service public transportation. And since the people in the developing countries dreams to have their own passenger car, and considering that they lack of good quality public transportation, they opt to purchase their own vehicle through easier terms of payments or auto loan. Thus, increasing automobiles ownership is a problem. And also, the problem is also absence of active transportation facilities. So automobile dependence basically leads to traffic safety or traffic congestion problems in developing cities. And the second problem is the road hierarchy, or the road transport hierarchy, is mismatched with the land use management, meaning, for example, high design speed arterial roads are operating as a local street because the roadside are full of commercial establishments, resulting to traffic and safety concerns. Then, as the government sees this problem, the transportation planning leads to more on automobile oriented, meaning building more roads, constructing more and more roads for the automobiles. And the last problem in the developing cities is that the traffic composition is mainly heterogeneous, meaning variety of vehicles are plying along the road network, regardless of the road hierarchy. And for example, there are three-wheeled vehicles, such as tricycle in the Philippines, tuk-tuk in Thailand, wherein these are occupying national roads, which ideally are not supposed to be there. And these motorcycles, which are easily to purchase because of its low cost, and this is attractive with the people because this free them from the traffic congestion. And however, this motorcycle usage are resulting to increasing motorcycle-related road crash incidents. And regardless of this condition, the government in developing cities focus their priority in building more roads to serve the automobiles. Thus, active transportation in developing cities are stigmatized. And it was recently when COVID-19 pandemic hits the globe, and developing cities and developing countries started and realized to develop design guidelines for active transportation or bicycle facilities due to the increasing demand of bicycle traffic. And the guidelines consist of these provisions, such as hardware, peripheral hardware only, not focusing on the software or how to promote it. And as shown in the guidelines adopted here in the Philippines, we have 3 classes of bicycle path, class 1 to 3. And these are varying depending on the operating speed and motorized vehicular average daily traffic. And according to the study, of our study, in the Philippines highway, a lot of national roads and city roads are getting bicycle lanes. However, due to the already dense area in the cities or urban areas, the cycle path, which are ideally separated from vehicular traffic, are occupying the same space for vehicular traffic. And to ensure that cyclists are safe, even with this overlapping space, enforcement are being enacted. However, this results to safety and mobility issues for motorized vehicles, like this scenario. And according to the study, or to our study, we found out that these cycle paths are not coherent with the public transportation, and the cycle path have obstructions along the path or the network of the cycling network in the Philippines, in the metropolitan areas. And there's a question of sustainability. Even we adopted now, there's a question after this pandemic, can we sustain this active transportation? And there's a question of what is the future of active transportation in developing cities like Metro Manila, Metro Cebu, and Metro Davao, or other cities in developing countries? Well, my answer is it depends. It depends on what we are doing today, for it will define our future. We can continue adopting or going around the automobile dependency, which is unsustainable and diminishing our quality of life. Or let us rethink the streets. Let us think that those who are less on wheels shall have more on roads. There are a lot of successful transformation all over the globe that transform cities from car-centric city to bicycle-friendly and champion cities. What do? Let's start forming a comprehensive integrated active transportation development plan or national cycling plan like what Germany did, aiming to make one city at a time into champion cities in active transportation. This development plan and policy shall lead to making cycling possible, safe and respectable, and getting and keeping more people cycling through infrastructure efforts and promotion efforts. In the paper where I read, they mentioned that in Germany, they started categorizing cities from starter, climber, and champion. Basically, developing cities could be categorized as starter. And we could start focusing for developing cities to start developing guidelines that are suitable and with the consideration of safe system approach, ensuring that the speed are being managed, as well as making the road safer for all road users and vehicles. And also the planning shall be inclusive, meaning facilities for all road users, such as motorcycles who are usually occupying the bike lanes, shall have their own designated facility. And also, the facility shall be coherent with the public transportation to attract more cyclists and allowing bicycles to board in public transportation such as water ferries, buses, and trains, and provision of peripheral hardware such as parking facilities. And likewise, we need to increase the education and strengthen the culture of active transportation, starting with the curriculum of education. And all of this shall be bounded by law. Funding must be continuing. And also this must be led by leaders who are actually using the active transportation. And the developing cities could then start creating their policies, the national cycling plan, with the goal of developing hardware, peripheral hardware, and software. Likewise, it is important to establish periods and key performance indicators to measure objectively the success of the program, and also define the roles of government, non-government organizations, and private sectors on each factors. And these are examples of successful efforts in Iloilo through good governance and good education. So thank you for your attention. That's all from me. Thank you, Tendiaki.
Thank you, John. I think well done. I see the Philippines are shifting to cycling, and it's also important to mention that other developing cities may learn from from other cities who have successfully shifted to cycling. I think one of the great cities is Bogota, Colombia. I think so. Yeah, it's Bogota in Colombia. And I think that's one of the great examples where other cities could learn. And this can be used as blueprints. So, yeah, I think you also touched on you also raised an important question on what are we doing now. And I think it's a challenge to us as road planners, engineers, young professionals to be able to know what we need and be able to correct it before it's too late. So thank you so much. Now we move on to the next segment, which is our panel discussions. So I'll ask all the previous speakers to get ready. And to the attendees, please feel free to post questions in the Q&A sections. The panelists will attend to them at the end of the discussion. So before we start our discussion, I would like to share some few facts and figures for all of you to, to think about. So according to WHO, our World Organization, insufficient physical activity is the fourth leading risk factor for global mortality, and active travel can help to prevent many of 3.2 million deaths from physical inactivity. And out of the 3.2 million deaths, 2.6 million are in low and middle income countries. Also, physical inactivity is estimated to cost more than $50 billion annually in increased health expenditure. This is a very huge sum. I think we need to really think about this one. So where I live, using bicycles and walking, and also using public transport is seen as a mode for the poor. While driving a car is seen as a status symbol for the rich. And I'm quite sure it's not happening in my where I live only. I think most developing countries are facing this challenge as well. So, and also active travel, maybe you cannot blame people because active travel is not safe, it's not secure. At the same time, we all know it keeps us healthy. So maybe can healthy and safety be traded off against each other? I don't think so. I think these can work hand in hand and reap best results towards sustainability and zero death and zero greenhouse gas emissions, especially the transport emissions. So moving into our discussion, I will start with Alan. Alan, the most common reason for people not shifting into active mobility is safety. Personally, I will never cycle in a road environment mixing with fast-moving cars. I will never. So a question to you maybe is, how can cities redesign to promote active travel and protect the active travelers? What could be the best approach to this problem?
Okay, great. So thank you for the question. It's a very nice question, actually. So here I think that we have two cases. Okay, so we have the existing cities and cities that are planning to be built. Okay, so for the future cities, it is very easy since they should be planning beforehand the pedestrian and cyclist path. So as well as making the roads accessible for them, for the vulnerable users, and to be able to use the public transportation. So this is done after following a nice urban planning study. However, for the existing cities, the issue can get a little bit harder since you have to restructure the current urban planning that was made a long time ago, back when the old mentality was there, and this old mentality did not prioritize the vulnerable users. Okay, so you have to follow a certain process. First of all, you have to make sure that that the government entity is able to fund the project of demolition and reconstruction of the road itself. And then you have to focus during the implementation of your plan to kind of reach a result of minimizing the passenger cars that have only one passenger in them. Okay, so after you do that, you can start thinking of a shift towards a more sustainable mode of transport, which is either use the public transportation or cycling or walking in this case. Okay, and then the last step, I think, would be to improve the public transportation and its dedicated infrastructure so that people won't have any excuses not to use it.
Oh, that's so true. I think most cities were built on outdated transport planning approaches that only prioritized cars. And as we redesign, I think we need to think outside the steel box, which is the car, and build low-speed streets, separated walkways for pedestrians, cycle lanes, protected crossing facilities. And I think streets should be attractive, safe, and accessible for all, including persons with disabilities. Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll go to Harry. Harry, what do you think in this context?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. For me, in terms of speaking about cities that have already been built, I think it's about reimagining them. So I think the question about having a city that exists where everyone has to try and get to the center every day to work, to drop their kids off at school, to meet up with their friends, that it's a thing of the past. What we really need to be thinking about is moving our cities towards 15 to 20-minute zones where you have everything you need in a 15-minute, 20-minute distance from your house, either walking or cycling. So what we need to think about is, okay, what possible need do people still have to use their cars in cities? And there are very good reasons why people still use their cars, is because they work jobs where they need to bring equipment with them. They are delivery drivers. They are dropping their kids off at the school, and they can't necessarily do it on the bike because maybe they have 3 kids. So all of these use cases we need to think about and start imagining cities in a different way. So do we? I think Paris is a very good example of this. They are cutting through traffic from the city center, meaning that only if you live in the city center or you're a taxi can you go in the city center, and that means that it's prioritizing shared modes and walking and cycling and public transport more. So I really think it's a question of trying to build cities, because cities are getting larger, but building cities where even if you live in the west or the east or north or south of the city, that you still have 6 days out of 7 everything you need before one day that you might need to go into the city center. I think that's essentially where we need to go.
Oh, okay, thanks. I'll quickly jump to Job. Talking about going active without talking about business opportunities and projects that young professionals could take part in and also benefit from, I think it will not be fair. So I believe, Job, some of your work involves writing innovative project proposals at national level, and probably if you could detail at least 3 business opportunities that young professionals gathered here might venture into. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think there are, at least for organizations, there are a lot of opportunities to write business proposals, innovation projects that more often than not fail when we talk about promoting active mobility. As I said, they are often very much written from the viewpoint of extending what we know about car traffic management towards other modes, which is just too limited and not the case. I think very much the involvement of young professionals would be indeed looking at the local context, because indeed we've talked about that, very much looking at local context, not only infrastructure, but also culture, what the economy looks like, what the society looks like. and having a feel for what the city would benefit, but also being able not to look merely indeed towards a vehicle as a status symbol, but also looking past that and thinking, how could other modes be maybe more attractive, also more sexy indeed for young people, and not let all these proposals be written by I think older generations that will definitely indeed only look at a vehicle as a status symbol. I think there's very much a crunch to get these young people involved, and maybe have a bit of a more of a say in what we actually now propose. Is it just extending car mobility in the city, or are we actually trying to change things for the better? And I think on the second one, that's our role to play.
Now, okay, thank you, Job. And I think among like our attendees gathered here are researchers and academic professionals as well. And I think, Joel, you are in that field. Maybe a question to you maybe could be, what could be improved in the academic curricula in order to enhance new skills, upskilling, and of course, as far as going active is concerned, what could be of the greatest value? And also, are there any research gaps, particularly in this subject? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the question. Well, basically in modifying the curricula in the education sector, we need ecstatic promotion efforts through governance and probably legislating this into, or say, Active Transportation Act, wherein it includes the modification or enhancement of our existing curriculum in all levels, from elementary to higher education. From elementary, we can start giving them lectures about the importance and appreciating about sustainable transportation. Especially in countries like us, it's not being given. And also, let's start teaching them on how to utilize this active transportation mediums like bicycle or scooters, and also teach them about the traffic rules and regulations consistent with the legislation. And also with the proper use of safety gears. So we must include that in the curriculum of education. And also in the higher education, we can include or increase universities or academic institutions that focus on research on active mobility, particularly addressing safety issues in different locations all over the globe, like developing or developed, because the problems are varying depending on the location. And also we can focus on improving hardware, peripheral, and software, as I've discussed. And also there are sectors that could also focus on discussing the active mobility impact on social as well as in economy, so that it could be used for the legislators to fund more projects or programs related to active transportation. And also with regards to the research gap, I believe research in developing countries should focus on looking into developing guidelines, not only adopting guidelines from developed countries, because I believe there are features that are not suitable from developed countries to developing countries. So we must focus on that and what we can do in order to make the guidelines suitable in this kind of cities. And also one gap, I believe, is the research on how we can make active those persons with disabilities. How can we include them in the process as well as in the system? But I think I can see developed countries who are already doing this. They already include the persons with disabilities to make active. So I think those are the points that I can share. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I think due to our time, I will just go around, starting with Job, then Joel, then Alan, and then lastly Harry. What are your final words? What is your final call to action?
So my call to action is indeed also looking at the questions that came in over the chat, not to focus too much on thinking that people that are required to take a car will not be able to and will be restricted not to, but very much focus on people that would like to have another option to take their trip, but they are now forced to take the car because it's the only way to do so, and thereby also creating congestions for people that really have to use the car. How to look for these people that would like another option, provide another option to them, and therefore benefiting us all. So I think that's the mindset that we need to get.
Okay, thanks. And John.
Yeah. So my call to action to the young professionals or not, I believe listening right now, is involve yourself whenever there's opportunity, especially in promoting active mobility in your locality, in your city, because active mobility has challenges, especially when it comes to promotion. There are fake news or fake information regarding the benefits of doing active transportation. And with that, we are the future leaders of our cities. If we are into the active mobility, we can have the opportunity to lead our city to be more active than what we are right now. So that's all for me, Tendiaki. Thank you.
Okay, Alain.
Okay, thank you. So I think that my call for action here would be for youth that are involved in legislation. So let's say it's for legislators to involve the private sectors as the new technologies are emerging every day. And those technologies, they are always reached by the private sector, especially the youth people who are always up to date. So for example, just like in this summit, I mean, most of us are here gathered from private entities to discuss how we can make a move towards a better transportation system within a sustainable city. So I think that will be my call to action.
Thanks. And Harry, what's your call to action?
I think it would be for me, take responsibility. Time's not up to save the planet. We're running out of time, but we're not there yet. So don't give up.
No, perfect. Yeah, for sure. We are behind time, and we cannot keep losing people from polluted air and everything. So I would like to thank you all for sharing us the very educative information, and you all opened our minds. I hope many questions that have been plugging our mind up, and we look at active travel with a new, different eye, and our standing will be different. Thank you so much, and over to you, Ray. Thank you.
Thanks, Tendiaki.
All right, so we had a very, very meaningful discussion in going active. And in fact, we had a little bit consumed a bit of the time, but I do hope that everyone is still on board. And we still have two sets of topics. And up next would be going electric. And this will be facilitated by Shashank Misra, IRF Young Professional Lead for Asia, and also of ECAC Innovations. Shashank, are you still there?
Hey Ray, hi, I'm here.
Yes, all right. So you can go ahead.
Thank you. So it was a really interesting discussion on going active, and I like how it segued between active lifestyle as well as electric mobility, and that's one of the perfect inroads to the upcoming panel. So we have Thomas Hewitt here with us. He'll be talking about bus fleet electrification and the pathways for sustainable energy. Thomas is a sustainable urban development professional with a work experience at the UN Human Settlement Programs. He's been part of the focal team at the agency's global headquarters in Nairobi. He's worked on how changes can be made in urban mobility and can help achieve the reduction of global greenhouse emissions. And alongside, he's been working towards the 1.5 degree stabilization pathways, UN SDGs, and the new urban agenda. So I would like to bring Thomas on board to talk about his, but before we jump to Thomas, I'd like to also introduce our second speaker today. The second one is Kapil Kokam. He's from SlowCat Partnership, and he'll be talking about how we can move towards a low carbon urban mobility. The case study that he's talking about is from Cameroon, and Tokum is actually a junior specialist in pro and poor rural urban transport sector development. He looks at, he's been working with various private sector research institutes and international organizations such as UN Habitat, the World Bank, and he specializes in how urban and infrastructure planning and transport policies can be looked at, and particularly focusing on road safety and climate mitigation. He's also worked effectively as an assistant program management officer on a number of infrastructure projects. So I see his experience ranges from Western and Eastern Africa, and it's mostly looking at a bit of governance, a planning, looking at road safety. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion from him as well. So let's move to Thomas first. Hi, Thomas. Are you there with us? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Tomasz Cigut. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you. So I will give a brief presentation on electrification of public transport, specifically bus fleets. I will begin by giving just a brief overview of the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework. This is something actually we have sort of already spoken about since the beginning. So usually this is the framework that's been endorsed by many urban planners around the world, as well as organizations such as the UN, C40 Cities Network, WRI, ICLEI. And basically the objective is to kind of put a strategy in place. So focus primarily on avoid, then shift, then improve. And avoid speaks about new urban planning approaches such as the 15-minute model, bringing places together in our daily travel. So places you have to visit on a daily basis, work, school, grocery store. The shift speaks about shifting from the use of personal vehicles to active mobility in public transport. And then improve speaks about new technologies, improved services. So I will speak specifically about the part of shift, so public transport. The reason we talk about this is carrying capacity per mode. Elaine, at the very beginning of this summit, showed some pictures about carrying capacity of cars. I'm sure we've all seen similar pictures in the past. So cars usually carry 1 to 2 persons. They're highly inefficient because they take up a lot of space while transiting the city. And in terms of carrying capacities, the largest carrying capacities are with public transport. The reason why I'm focusing on buses specifically in this presentation is because buses are the predominant mode of public transportation in the world. Even cities which have light rail systems, such as metros and trams, they use buses as complementary services on secondary routes. And what's even more important, buses are the key form of transport in developing countries, where basically many cities are not able to afford the large investments needed for light rail transit. So buses are the predominant mode. And also what I want to say is that this is the mode of transport that's crucial for developing countries specifically. I would like to touch a little bit on this specifically, why I think that it's relevant to put a focus on developing countries. These are countries where the largest population growth is taking place. They're also experiencing development. Cities are growing at an unprecedented rate. There's a high degree of urbanization taking place. And also, if we look at the cities in these countries, they're basically being transformed and changed from year to year. There's rapid change undergoing, and basically the urbanization processes in these cities are both a challenge as well as an opportunity, because now is the chance to do things differently, formulate cities in a better and more efficient way. Here I would specifically mention the Prt Systems. So the bus rapid transit system is essentially a system that operates similarly to a metro, but essentially it requires a smaller investment and is also more adaptable than the, let's say, railway tracks. So this is a system that works well in cities in developing countries, which are changing. So also the points of focus are changing in the cities. Maybe for example, if we look at Chinese cities, what they were like some 20, 30 years ago, and the way they are now, it's basically a very radical change. We can expect similar change to occur in Southeast Asia, as well as in African countries. Then speaking specifically about bus fleet electrification, there are two countries which are taking the lead, or two cities even more so. The largest bus fleets at the moment are the largest electric bus fleets at the moment are in Shenzhen, China, and in Bogota, Colombia. And also the number of electric vehicles are growing worldwide. So also other cities are taking initiative. Glasgow, which hosted COP26 last year, also committed to improving their electric bus fleet. There's also initiatives in Milan, and also outside of Europe. There's initiatives in Jakarta, Latin America. Also African cities are taking up electric buses. I believe that Kenya just recently unveiled that they will introduce electric buses on their roads. And in terms of numbers, if we look at the situation, there are currently around 500,000 electric buses in the world. In total, in the world, there are operating around 3 million buses. So these are buses that include everything from fossil fuels to electric. And out of that, 500,000 have now been electrified. So we still have a long way to go. Nevertheless, there are efforts. So if we look at Europe, if we compare 2021 to 2020, 50% more electric buses have been purchased. And Europe now has a fleet of 8,500 electric buses already in place. However, as noted, yeah, there's still a long way to go. And in conclusion, I would like to just reiterate what even other panelists have already said. We need to make sure that alternatives to cars, so public transport, active mobility, becomes more affordable, more convenient, and also more attractive to the average user. This is briefly from my side. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Thomas, for the discussion, and really interesting. So I have questions coming, but we'll hold off to the panel discussion, and let's move to Tokam. Hi, Tokam, are you there with us?
Thank you.
Hi, Tokam. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah,
So over to you. And yes.
I cannot. I think you have to stop your presentation, Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas, please, if you could stop the presentation.
Yes, sorry, just trying to see how I can stop the presentation.
Perfect. Over to you, Tokam.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Good.
Yep.
Can you see my start moving?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Good. So, hi everyone. So I am Prt Tokam. I'm a PhD candidate in civil engineering, infrastructure and transport at the Pan African University based in Nairobi. But I'm also a policy advocacy and policy analyst and advocacy intern at local partnership since July of this year. So the presentation of today is entitled Toward Low Carbon Urban Mobility, addressing Cameroon heavy dependence on used vehicles. Used vehicles has been a very big issue in Africa, especially in Africa. And then through this research, we are going to tackle this problem. So as an overview of this presentation, you know that every year actually millions of used vehicles are exported to Africa and to other low and middle income parts of the world. So we know that they support actively the mobility in Africa, but also they have a huge impact on the climate change, but also to our, on our environment. So what is usually, been done in Africa is that government in Africa often impose bans on and higher penalty on the importation of those vehicles. But what you can also notice is that the intervention really leads to, a meaningful gain and advantage in public health facilities, but also in the reduction of road crashes, road traffic accidents. So we'll consider for this specific presentation the case of Cameroon, one of the vital destinations of used vehicles in Central Africa. So in the view of Gooding, what could be learned to better address the African heavy dependence on used vehicles. So we can have a great idea of some number. According to the United Nations Environmental Programme, so 14 million of used vehicles, vans and buses are exported have been exported between 2015 and 2018 from Europe, USA, and Japan. And then 80% of them went to low and middle income countries. And then you can imagine the place on Africa, this destination. So actually in Africa, only 5 countries actually have put a strong limitation on the importation of vehicles, and 16 actually have fair, regulation on the importation of those vehicles. And then you see that 24 countries ban the vehicles, older than 10 years in Africa. And then you can easily see the place of my country, Cameroon, here in this ranking of a regulation on importation of vehicle in Africa. So, but as you have been said that those vehicles, they support the mobility in Africa. I will publish a blog series in a few days from Sulocat toward the COP27, where we try to see the place of used vehicle in supporting the economical activities in Africa, and then we address some advocacy measures toward the COP27 in Africa. So. The downside of that is that those vehicles, they contribute really to the air pollution in Africa, but also the kills, actually, because according to the data, every year, actually, we encounter like 600,000 people can be killed due to the air pollution. And then we also have a consequence on road fatalities around the world. And Africa is the main focus when you talk about the road fatalities and injuries due to road crashes, accident. So what have been observed in Africa is that, for example, in Cameroon, you cannot import vehicle older than 10 years. And we can also see some restriction around Africa. You have the case of Uganda. You have Ghana also with the same regulation. And then you also have the case of Kenya, where I'm based now, about the bans on importation of used vehicles in those countries. So what we can easily see that some about the outcome of the control intervention in those countries. You see that I put a reduction in used vehicle import officially is in bracket, because according to law in 2020, when Cameroon banned the second-hand car importation, on used vehicle between 2011 and 2019, there was a sharp reduction from 22.25% in 2011 to 11% in 2019. And then later, when the government lifted the ban, the rate of registration shot up to 15.84. But you have registered a contradiction from the result of MIREP in 2019 that found that the ban did not lead to a reduction in air pollution, for example, in Cameroon. And recently, IRF have shown that the imposition of ban and penalty on used vehicle import does not lead to a commensurate increase in new vehicle purchase in Africa. And you can easily see that, when you analyze the data, the road traffic data of Cameroon from 2011 to 2019, that contradicts what has been published officially by the government about the impact of the ban of importation of used vehicle in Cameroon. So in order to understand that, why, when the government put the ban on importation of vehicle, it does not lead, to a climate benefit. We have been trying to analyze the political economy of vehicle dependence in Cameroon. And what we have been found is really interesting. So actually in Cameroon, what the government tried to do is to prioritize, the automobile infrastructure, especially roads. And then what you have begun from the colonial, the colonization is that we try to, based on our automobile dependency planning. So we try to prioritize the land use. The land use patterns are mostly directed to road infrastructures. And then when you are doing that, you have an inadequate investment in another mode of transport, for example, railways, bicycle, and walking in Africa. So all these, by prioritizing automobile infrastructures, especially road, but also the land pattern in Africa, so we have inadequate investment in other means of transport. And by doing all this, we encourage the automobile consumption cultures in Africa. And then that lead to an entrenched motorized transport dependency. So now in this context of entrenched motorized transport dependency, with the weak regulation, on vehicle standard in Africa, coupled with a low level of income and a limited number, of vehicle produced in Africa, we stimulate the demand and supply of used vehicle actually. So by doing that, we see that we stimulate the demand and supply of used vehicle. So when a government, for example, put bans on importation, what you usually do is that we just act, on regulation, but you are not acting on the demand. So now this where is the problem now. So now about the official data of Cameroon, where they put bans on importation that leads to a reduction of on importation of vehicle. That is not true, because most of those vehicles, there's a clear evidence that most of those vehicles go to what we call the black market. Because according to the European Union, they estimate that annually 4 million of such vehicles, are injected in the global fleet in Africa, and we can easily say that they are directed to the global south country, and especially in Africa. So given the dynamic of global vehicle export, there's a little dots that majority of them end up in Africa and other places like my country, Cameroon. So this means that it seems that the bans and penalty do not really bring down supply or consumption, but only redirect, the market to what you call the black market. So the way forward now, after this analysis, that we have a very best case practice that Mauritius shared with us. Actually, what they have done, Mauritius, is that they have been trying to initiate a shift to cleaner energy use in transportation sector in Africa. So you can easily see the upward shift and improved approach that my colleague Thomas was sharing just initially with us. And then what they did is that they adopted a clean technology in transportation, coupled with some very good regulation, and then they achieve an increase of 80%, in number of electric vehicles between 2009 and 2014. So what also need to be considered now is the barrier of shifting to clean technology in Africa, because you need to acknowledge that in Africa there's a lot of barrier to shift, from actual free emission vehicle to clean vehicle. So what has been observed in Africa is that there is a lack of enabling policy and regulation framework on, and that is one, it's integrated. And what it means is that we need a well-coordinated, and integrated approach across all regions of the continent. But also, the high price of electricity in Africa is also a bit, a great barriers to shift, to clean technology, because a lot of people actually, they are looking for, at least for electricity before thinking about how to, to electrify our cars. So that's the main problem in Africa. But also there is a very weak standardization about the clean technology of vehicle technology in Africa. Some other economic bloc, they have adopted some regulation about the Euro 1 to 4 standard, but in Africa, very few, if none, have started following those kind of standards. So as a recommendation for our young professionals, so we need to act actually for those working in regulation, but also in registered development. So we need to establish a standard as a starting point and harmonization of the standard across the continent. So I just call all young professionals to work on it. But also there's a lot to do in terms of research and development on clean technology for vehicles. This with the promotion of the active mobility in Africa. So now you can easily understand why in this summit they started with the concept of active mobility, because it's so important, especially for us in Africa, where we usually have the habit to walk already. So that will be not a big challenge for us in Africa to start investing in active mobility. And finally, the collaboration across the region and the continent. For example, I listed 5 here where you can have a look. And then the most important now is the data sharing and dissemination, but also to have a well-coordinated and assessment and make the people be more responsible of what will happen if they don't respect the rule and regulation. So those are some reference we use for our research and investigations. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Tokam, for the presentation. And let's open this up for Q&A. And I have some questions that I already have. So let's start off with one thing that I want from both of you, because I see that Tokam, you've been looking at, and Tokam, can you please stop sharing your screen? Sorry about that. So as I was saying, I have noticed that both of you have been looking at different segments in the electrification space, one from a used vehicle perspective and the other from a public transport bus perspective. So I would want to understand first, what are the regulatory hurdles that you see from scaling this up? As I see, Tokam, you mentioned about enforcement, and Thomas, you were talking about how bus electrification is looking at different geographies, different countries, how they're approaching it. So I would want to first understand from a regulatory perspective, what do you think are the levers required to make it scalable? And second, what are the barriers that you see would need a policy shift? And you can talk in perspective of governments, you can talk in perspective of difference that you're observing in geographies. So yeah, over to you. Either one of you can go first. Yeah, Thomas, after you.
Okay, so thank you for for the questions actually. So what I've been trying to to explain after our investigation is that there's a lot of barrier, because what, putting bans on regulation or importation of used vehicles is not actually the solution, what you can see, because we saw that all the market has been redirected to the black market. So we need to act as a block, because actually if only Cameroon, for example, put bans on importation of used vehicle, and Nigeria is continues to import vehicles older than 10, 15 years, it doesn't help actually. So to act on it, we need to act as a block. All the economic blocks should agree on one regulation, and they should respect it. This is why at the end of our presentation, we talk about responsibility. So every country has to be responsible of their actions toward the shift to clean technology. And some barriers, some barrier actually in the African context, there's lots of evidence about, actually in Africa, you have not reached actually the normal living standards for most countries. So actually people are still looking, for electricity actually, even to charge their phones in Africa, in most of the region. So talking about shift to clean technology now is because it's also dependent on the level of income of the country. So even in Europe, buying a new vehicle sometimes is not that so easy. They have to look, for rents and so on. So, and then it's something so difficult because you are demanding to African countries, to act on it. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So we are asking to such kind of African countries, to look actually for a sufficient level of incomes, but also something that is like relevant to actually, let's say, a living standard much higher than even expected for them. So let's start by trying to convince those economic blocks in Africa, for example, to set up with regulations, strong regulation on importation, and all of them to agree on those regulations before looking for what will be the next step.
Okay, interesting. Thomas, your take on the policy barriers and for bus electrification.
Thank you, Shashank, and thank you also to Tokam. Tokam, you already said some very good points. I would actually also like to maybe shift the viewpoint a little bit. I think that one thing that also needs to be looked at is the other side, so the exporter side. Currently what's happening is that basically most of the developed countries, Europe, Asia, Northern America, are literally dumping old vehicles in Africa. That's what's happening, and making extra profit out of it. I think that as well as, there's a crucial need for African countries to limit such imports. There should also be restrictions even within, for example, within Europe for exports of such vehicles. There should be regulations put in place from the exporting side as well. Then when we look at the side of African countries, the story is two-way. Like on one hand, the issue is also that most of the locals don't have an alternative, or they can't even afford to buy a high-priced, good quality vehicle. So they turn to basically used vehicles because that's the only thing they can afford. And I think that the simple ban on old vehicles will not solve the problem. It will only create more problems for the average citizen. What's needed is good alternatives. Tokam, you mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, that you live in Nairobi. So maybe you recall some years ago in Nairobi city center, they closed traffic. And what happened immediately was a total collapse of the transport because there were no alternatives. Public transport is not functional. So essentially what you need is good alternatives for public transport, good alternatives for active mobility. And personally, I would say that in many developing countries, this should be the focus, providing good alternatives and also enabling sort of a social shift, a mind shift. Someone has already mentioned earlier that one of the problems is also that a car is viewed as a status symbol. This is a big challenge. People don't want to cycle. Cycling is for poor people. What needs to be done is not just enabling people to cycle. You need to make sure that cycling and public transport are of quality and that they enable basically convenient, affordable, and also attractive mode of transport. If you have a train that's comfortable, it's nice, it's basically modern, then everybody wants to take the train. That's the go-to mode of transport. But if you have an old rusty train that nobody wants to take, I want to take a car, And what's happening now, for example, in Kenya, is that people's lives are getting better. People are getting higher and higher income. And the first thing they do is buy a good car so that their life becomes more convenient. But if you provide an alternative, then also this changes. And then, if you have public transport, that also enables people with lower income to use that. And in that way, they can even, let's say, they can make savings, which they can then use for other purposes, better healthcare, education, and so on.
So that's actually a very interesting take on, that, because I see something similarity here in India as well, how different, modes of transport are associated with different status symbols. Turning the conversation to electric mobility, and so Thomas, on the bus electrification, or how do you see public transport being transformed with bus electrification? But keep in mind, how would you compare that in the West, in the eastern side, in the sub-Saharan African region? And I mean, not just from a perspective of developing or developed world context. I'm not talking in that. Rather, different geographies have different temperatures that we are working in, and that would impact your battery size, your overall, from a tech spec perspective, right? The efficiencies of the system. So how do you see that affecting, and how do you see it expanding?
Thank you. Actually, that's a very good point. In general, when we talk about electrification of transport, it's very important to note that it's essentially easier to electrify public transport than it is personal vehicles, because a vehicle takes a long time to charge. It has to be sitting somewhere. It has to stop. And, an individual taking a vehicle, let's say traveling somewhere, you need an individual charging station. You need separate infrastructure. Whereas a bus system, a public bus system, is already an enclosed system. Buses circulate. And it's easy to have some buses stationary, some circulating, they switch places, buses go on charging, buses go out of charging. The system works better. And even in terms of battery capacity, the system is more convenient for bus operators. Or alternatively, you can even have a hydrogen system has very high limitations for personal vehicles, but it works if you have a larger system. So this is also an aspect that has to be taken into account. You also mentioned different geographies. That actually is something I would also like to note. When we look at electrification of transport, electrification is just part of the story. We also have to look at the source of electricity, and we have to make sure that that part is sustainable. And actually, many countries, developing countries, have a better stance in that. Kenya has an objective to produce 100% renewable energy by 2030, which is ahead of many European countries. So the standing is actually better for transport electrification because the source of electricity exists. Also in terms of, like you mentioned, heat, for example. Heat can be a challenge, but it all depends on how it's implemented. It has to be adapted to the situation. We also talk about, sorry, I'm trying to put a lot of stuff in a brief answer.
Take your time.
Also, for example, when we look at, we had earlier a panel on active mobility. Nairobi, for example, is a city that has a lot of hills. People don't want to cycle because of that. But if you have electric bikes, you basically reduce this obstacle because you're able to cycle uphill without so much effort. So this is also a solution to a problem that currently exists. Similarly, if you live in a hot environment, let's say Ahmedabad in India, where it's also difficult to cycle because of the sun, if you provide shaded areas, you basically create an enabling environment. And also for public transport, there are issues, there are challenges in certain locations. Maybe routes are not interconnected. There are barriers in the city. There's always a way to overcome this. It's just a question of how you assess it and how you provide a solution.
So you're segueing into design thinking and urban infrastructure with that, right? Interesting. So Tokum, I have a question for you. You've been looking at used vehicles, and Thomas talked about a lot of electric vehicles. Do you see an overlap of sorts happening in Cameroon, where people, instead of jumping to used vehicles, are looking at retrofitted old used vehicles, which are electric? Do you think that is a model that could be explored in a geography like Cameroon? And also, I would like to get your take. That is first. The second is, I would like to get your take from a perspective of electrification in itself is a challenge in Cameroon. So what is a business model or a unique product roadmap that you foresee for electrification of mobility in Cameroon? So it's a two-parter. You can choose how you want to answer.
No, thank you for the question. Actually, Cameroon, according to their geographical location, should be like doing the same as Kenya, because you have the far north of Cameroon is, they have the sun for almost the whole year there, but you cannot understand why the government is not investing, in solar, renewable energy, and so on. So you can easily see that to some extent it's a matter of political will. So now if you look at now the national determined contribution of Cameroon, actually, for government, now they have to submit the second report of generation of NDC, the second report. But if you look at some African countries, there are some of them who are doing very good progress. For example, Kenya, Mauritius, and the North Africa, they are going very good. But the French-speaking part, of Africa, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, and so on, they are still lagging behind. So this, bring out now that idea of introducing and taking transport as key component of our national determined contribution especially for African countries, and this will pave the way to address all those issues you are putting up now. So now in Cameroon, the barrier side a lot actually, because Cameroon actually they need first actually to eat, as that when you talk about vehicles in Africa, someone will say, okay, I don't have a vehicle, but I'm not interested about how to electrify my vehicles and so on. So there's a lot to do from the government side, but also from the population. They need to understand that issue of climate change, because a lot of Africans, they don't understand when you talk about climate change. They're always thinking that it's for developed countries, but actually climate change, we are suffering a lot. For example, in Cameroon, we don't have regular agricultural seasons. We have drought here, we have flood in Chad and Central African Republic. So we are living those effects of climate change, but actually we are not, the population, they are not so I think that there's a lot of advocacy messages to share from our side as a young professional to act in our different locations to really change this point of view from the African side.
Interesting. So I see the barriers that you highlighted there from a government perspective and a policy perspective. That's quite interesting. As some insights that I've been observing in India particularly, there's been a massive electric vehicle boom, and we are seeing actually a bit of both. The bit that you're talking about, Tokam and Thomas, we have electric buses coming into play with the government initiative. So it would be interesting to see how battery swapping could be a way forward with solarized hubs as a way, right? And that could be for lighter electric mode transports, as Thomas, you're talking about electric bikes going up the hill, or in case of a used car, that becoming a battery swapping system, right? Leveraging the existing architecture. So this is a final question from me and more of how would both of you envision electric mobility in respective geographies, or particularly a favorite case study that you may have thought of, it could be any geography, by 2030 and 2050. How do you think electric mobility will transform, and what's the future that we're in for? You can take a couple of seconds to think through. If you have a response, go for it.
I would personally say that it will have to be through public transport. I think that's the key. Electrifying cars is not enough. It's maybe part of a solution, but it's not the solution because they're just not efficient. Efficiency goes through larger systems. Maybe one idea I had actually just now from hearing the two of you talk is also that one option how things might turn with the private sector is that people will find another solution, which is you take a used vehicle and you modify it. You change the engine to an electric engine, driving down the price, but still getting an efficient, clean vehicle out of it. But I think, however it is, the story is also different. Developing countries, developed countries. Developed countries, I think, have other options. For developing countries, also, one reason why we also don't want to go into the advance of personal vehicles, although we are sort of going there, is because it will drive inequality further. And what's more, also in developing countries, I feel like we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to do things better. Also, people, although there is a high uptake of cars, actually percentage is still small. So the trick is how to now change it before it becomes the same as elsewhere. Like in Europe now, we're trying to get rid of cars. But in, let's say, Africa, possibly also in India, cars are rising. So how do you prevent that, and how do you make a better world, basically?
Interesting. Tokam, your take on this?
Yeah, so thank you. So if you see, how we tackle that problem, actually, we have been investigating the problem from the private car side of view. And I like the point from Thomas, actually. So for me, my key message is that you have to build from what we already have in Africa. In Africa, we are working more than, in other part of the world. Actually, from Europe, we are already working. So people have the ability to work in Africa. In Africa, we are using public transport. What do you say in paratransit transport? We are using. The problem now is the comfort, is the something else, actually. So we can build off those two elements. So if you want to start electrification, I agree with Thomas. Let's start by electrification of public transport, actually. And then you also need, to bring those people to have another, travel patterns on their day-to-day activities. So try to prioritize, active mobility infrastructure. And I'm pretty sure that by acting on both, side, we can easily move from purely green mobility in Africa in 5-10 years.
Interesting. So thank you both for your time and your presentations. They were very insightful and a lovely discussion. So as we move to the next panel, before that, one call to action. if both of you have to say. Quick call to action. Let's go for that.
I would say make public transport attractive and convenient.
Awesome. Tokam, from your end.
Invest more in active mobility infrastructure in Africa.
Awesome. All right, thank you both. And let's move to the next panel. Ray, could you introduce the next section? Sorry, my bad.
Hi again. So I know that we have been a little bit tiny over time right now, but I'm very happy to have these kinds of discussions because, you know, it's really nice that ideas are crossing in, and we have really a global concept of mobility, not just on the one side, but it's really very diverse.
Agreed.
And to proceed to the next one. So Shashank, you're going to be on board still. Yes. And it's going to be going autonomous. I hope Cecilia and Iter are ready as well. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So in the going autonomous section, we have Cecilia joining us from Economical, and we have Iter joining us from SWACO. Cecilia will be talking about the challenges and perspectives in autonomous vehicles, and Iter will be talking about why CCAM, which is connected cooperative autonomous vehicles, cooperating connected autonomous vehicles, how they are much more than fancy AVs. So let's jump to Cecilia, and while Cecilia is loading her screen, I will do a quick introduction. Cecilia, are you there? Just a quick check.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Ray, can you stop the screen share? Yeah. So Cecilia, everyone is a civil engineer and is constantly curious about innovation, transformation, learning. And she's also an innovation coordinator at the Fuko Ecotovias and a member of the AJE 35, the Standing Committee on Research, Innovation, and Implementation Management for Transport. She has education background in Masters in Transportation Engineering and MBA, and she's a PhD candidate of Construction and Infrastructure Engineering. So with that, over to you, Cecilia, and I hope I've been pronouncing the name of the organization right. If so, please correct me. Over to you.
Okay, can I start? Are you listening
Yes,
to
you
me?
can.
Okay, everyone
Yes.
is seeing my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So hello, greetings to everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Cecilia. I'm from Brazil. I'm the innovation coordinator of Ecorodovia. Ecorodovia is a road to operator here in Brazil. And firstly, I'd like to thank the IRF for the opportunity to share with you a little about autonomous vehicles in Latin America and also in Brazil. So, okay, moving on. All right. Talking about Ecorodovia, my company. Economical is part of an Italian group called ASTM, and we are the biggest road operator in Brazil with more than 4,000 kilometers of paved highways, 4.5 thousand employees, and last year we invested more than 1.8 billion reais in infrastructure. So we operate the main road corridors in region South, Southeast, North, and Northeast, Midwest, as shown in this map over here in the right part of the screen. So our vision is to be the best highway infrastructure manager in Brazil with sustainability, and we are going to do that also being aligned with our SBTi targets for reduced emissions. And today I'm going to talk about how is Latin America and Brazil prepared for self-driving cars, and some of the prospects and challenges we must face for the future. So this is research from KPMG done in 2020. This was made with 30 countries all over the world to measure the readiness of adoption of AV, considering 4 points: policy and legislation, technology innovation, infrastructure, and consumer acceptance. So here on the left side, you can see the position of some countries. So we have Singapore here on the top, the best scores, followed by United States and United Kingdom. And in the last part of the chart, we can see Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. There are 3 countries from Latin America. So, although Latin America has a few cases, really few cases using autonomous vehicles, we are investing in this area. Chile in 2020 has made the first pilot project of self-driving vehicles, and they use an electric minibus, this one from the picture, running on a circuit of 1 kilometer in downtown Santiago. Santiago is the capital of Chile, but they were not using public roads. And this is something important to mention. Here in Brazil, the private sector is more active, and also we don't use public roads either. So, for example, in 2020, High Electric launched a vehicle that can be used in closed areas, such as industrial facilities, university campus, and resorts. Also, Embraer is working together with Air on a drone project for air cargo market. Embraer believes that autonomous flying taxi may be a reality in Brazil for the next 5 years. Let's see. So, looking on the regulatory framework, Chile is more prepared than Brazil. We are here on the last part of the chart. This research considered autonomous vehicle regulation of each country. This is financed by the government. Agents focus on autonomous vehicles and readiness of the governance for change. It's really important to mention that here in Brazil, we can't drive, our traffic code prohibits driving without using hands on the steering wheel. So we need to change our legislation to use AV. And I think that is going to be a while. It's going to take a lot of time and effort. Regarding infrastructure, good, I see with good eyes. For this research, KPMG has considered charge station, 4G signals coverage, road quality, readiness for change in technology, infrastructure, mobile connection speed, and broadband. So this research is from 2020, and here in Brazil, this year in July, we had an auction of the 5G mobile network. So I hope for the next research, we Brazil advance a few points on the chart. However, our territories account for almost half of the continent. It's a big country. And we have a big problem with connectivity, and this is a barrier to overcome. So, to conclude, Brazil is the least prepared of self-driving cars among 30 countries, considered policy, legislation, technology and innovation, infrastructure, and consumer acceptability. There's a report from McKinsey from 2021 that says that L4AV will be possible in 24 or 25 in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific for private cars, and will likely be limited to sites with pre-mapped highways and good weather. I think that in Brazil, this scenario can take more time due to the need of a legislative reform, or we need to do a specific legislation to use AV here. And also we need to improve our 4G or 5G signal coverage. As I mentioned, we are a huge country and we have this kind of barrier to overcome. However, Brazil's situation can be improved with new incentive programs from the government to develop more efficient, safe transportation and more research on this area. The good news that Brazilian consumers are very keen to buy new tax products and services. So I think we are going to push a little bit this kind of technology here. And here in Economics, we believe that AV brings more safety to our highways user and also ensure a more orderly flow of traffic, maximizing it, and consequently there will be less need for expensive works, hence less environment damage and better highways operation. We also have engineering research groups we call Highways of the Future. And we are focused on what we need to do in medium and large term to improve our infrastructure and safety device in order to attend autonomous vehicles needs. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecilia, for this amazing presentation. We'll come to the question and answers in the discussion section. So over to you, Itir. And while you're loading your presentation, I'll just give you a quick introduction. So Itir has been working as an innovation engineer with the fast prototyping team at SWACO. She focuses on new trends in mobility field and in order to develop a more future-proof solution in the context of ITS, which is Intelligent Transport Systems. She especially works in the area of CCAM, MAS, Intelligent Transportation Systems, multimodal, and sustainable transport. Currently, she's involved in managing fast prototyping projects on the mobility management and representing SWACO Solution Center in multiple publicly funded projects. So CCAM, for everyone, is cooperative, connected, and automated mobility. And over to you, Itir.
Thank you very much, Shashank, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here, everyone, and to have the opportunity to do this presentation. I'll just jump straight to it now, since we already exceeded our time. So, to briefly looking at the content. Yeah.
Sorry to interject. Can you go full screen, please?
Oh, yes, true. I thought it was. Yeah, now it is, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So to briefly looking at the content of my presentation today, I will try to explain the role of infrastructure in CCAM solutions. So first, I'll talk about what CCAM is and why do we need it to begin with. Then I will show an example how a CCAM architecture can look like through some use case examples. So let's first take a step back to understand why are we looking at, in general, intelligence solutions so intensely? Why do we need them? Well, we know that the share of population living in urban areas in Europe is about 74%, and this number goes even higher to 80% in the US. So we basically have cities that are expanding together with the number of cars on the road, and this is bringing serious environmental and social costs to our society. It has been proven until now many times that building roads, new roads or expanding roads are not a solution for such problems. So what do we basically have? We have increasing amount of people trying to go from A to B on a space that is not unlimited. So we basically need to use our existing space, our infrastructure in a more efficient way. We need solutions, we need intelligent solutions that addresses all three pillars of sustainability, which is rather challenging. But when we talk about going autonomous, when we talk about autonomous mobility in general, I believe that often images similar to this comes to mind. But I want to ask the question that when we say going autonomous, do we simply just talk about autonomous vehicles themselves? In other words, is it enough to just have a car that doesn't need your help to take you from A to B? Well, it involves multiple other actors than simply the vehicle itself. So now, if you would define what CCAM is, it is basically a set of solutions, technologies that enables vehicle, infrastructure, and other road users to communicate to each other. It is especially important to make our roads safer and more efficient. And it also paves the way for a future with autonomous vehicles and their integration to our overall transportation systems. In other words, we can say that connectivity and cooperation are prerequisites for safe automation. CCAM also plays an important role enabling smart cities or services like MAS. And we in SWACO specifically approach CCAM as holding a great potential for the safety and efficiency for all road users. Now, if you look at the right side of the slide now, you can see the main components of CCAM. And as you can see, it's not just about the technologies developed specifically for the vehicle itself, but we also have different types of infrastructure here that is necessary for a truly connected and automated system. Now, going back to my initial point on the role of infrastructure. Now we need to zoom out to understand this from the vehicle and towards a higher scale. On this visual, you can see an example of how a CCAM architecture can look like. And this architecture can be different among different use cases and or urban areas in general that they are implemented in. But in general, we see two types of communication. We see with the blue lines, you can see here on this visual, it represents the long-range communication, which basically relies on cellular networks. And with the orange line, you see short-range communication, which basically enables the vehicle to communicate with its immediate surrounding. Also here on the screen, you can see one of the multiple use cases that can be deployed with the traffic light information. And we know that connecting vehicles to traffic light systems makes driving in the city more efficient and relaxed. So this example that's shown here is a speed advice service. And it's basically a service that calculates the optimal speed for the vehicle to avoid stopping at an intersection, and sends this information to the vehicle so that it can adjust its behavior. Let's say we have a vehicle that is approaching to an intersection. This service may suggest decreasing speed starting from about 250 meters before the intersection so that the vehicle can avoid stopping at the red light. If a stop at the red light is not possible to avoid, then a countdown timer counts down the seconds until the end of the red light phase. In this case, we are basically avoiding sudden accelerations or decelerations. Now I'll move to my last slide on this. I just want to mention two other use cases that we can easily deploy with the same architecture that I have shown you before. It is V2X prioritization and emergency vehicle preemption. But because of the time we have, I would just be talking about the V2X prioritization, the one on the left side of the slide. So it's basically giving priority to certain vehicles or road users at signalized intersection. It is highly customizable, meaning that it can be applied to different modes of transport. But let's say in case of public transport, let's say we have a bus that's running behind its schedule, and this bus is approaching to an intersection. As it is approaching, it sends a request to the traffic light controller, and then this traffic light controller receives this request, and if suitable, it adjusts the signal phases of the traffic lights with that on that intersection. In this case, the bus can pass the intersection without stopping. And so overall, this applies to public transportation. We know that prioritization for public transport eventually increases reliability and therefore attractivity. Now we can talk about many more CCAM solutions here that has a significant impact on road safety and efficiency, but a common aspect of these solutions is that they consist of different components operating together, with road infrastructure being a crucial one. With that being said, I would end my presentation. It was an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I give the stage back to Shashank.
Thank you, Adil. So very interesting, both the presentations. I think taking a step back, if we look at both of them, one is talking about highways and autonomous mobility from infrastructure lens, whereas Ethereal was more talking about the connectivity, how different devices, edge IoT solutions, and then we're looking at a more robust connected experience from an autonomous vehicle lens, not just a Tesla driving on the road, right? But a more infrastructure communicated lens. V2X and V2V is what you're looking at. So I would like to open this up to the floor and rather have both of you think from a lens. Right now we're talking about level 3 and level 4 autonomy, but looking at the current landscape of transport, how do you envision the roadmap towards the level 3, level 4 connected autonomous vehicles, if I want to call them? How do you envision that roadmap? And what are the different, well, regulatory barriers we know of, but what are the different levers that you need in order to make it exciting and adoptable, so that people adopt it? It's not just the cool thing to do, but also the safe thing to do could be one. But how do you envision that storytelling coming in place so that it can then be scaled. So maybe I'll start with you, Ether, and then we'll move to Cecilia.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. So it's good that you mentioned acceptance, because this is also a topic that we're trying to improve. It is very important for people to be aware of the potential benefits of CCAM. It is why on this slide, I tried to show a public transportation example. For instance, as you said, it's not just about an autonomous vehicle driving around, and it has much more potential. It can increase the mobility of people who basically can't drive or just don't want to drive, and so on. So it is important that we mention these potential benefits of CCAM to increase this awareness. And overall, it's also important to understand that, as I have seen from many of the people who are now listening us in their questions, one solution that's implemented into one city often doesn't really fit another city. So we have to really understand that we don't have that one solution fits all approach. We need to talk, we need to understand each area, each city, and their specific needs, including geographical features or cultural features even. So I would say it is a very important factor for us to take into account.
Thank you. Cecilia, your take.
I would like to repeat the question. I wasn't aware of the.
No worries. So the question was looking at the landscape right now, and you mentioned about the readiness levels in your presentation from a policy lens, readiness level from the highway infrastructure lens, right? And I would want to understand more so that what are the levers that you think would be needed, not just from a policy lens, but also from making it adopting. So making it adoptable, so everyone takes it up, it becomes acceptable for the public. And secondly, I was talking more from a perspective as to how do you envision the autonomous vehicle from a connected infrastructure lens, because you're working in highway space also. So Ether talked about communications in the public space. So how do you envision that going forward? To go from right now in the current landscape to level 4, level 3, how do you see that happening?
Okay, tough question. I don't really know how to answer that.
Go with your gut feeling. That's what I go with.
Something I note, you know, so your own notes on this research is that we are in the back of the how it's developing the world, but and something we need to invest and we need to do a lot is research, and we need to our government to invest in this. So here in Economics, we have this Highway of Future group, and we are looking for 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and what we need to adapt in our highways to meet the AV needs. And for being honest, we don't know what to do, because as I mentioned, we have this legislation problem. We need to do another legislation to use AV. So how it's going to happen? How long we are going to it's long to take and to have this change. So what we see is that we have a lot of startups and growing here in Brazil, but using only private roads. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Interesting. You have, yeah, interesting. So so one question I would move to Ether from more from a connected communication lens. When you're talking about vehicles, we talked about 4G, 5G infrastructure. There is a question that keeps coming up when we talk about connected vehicles, which is around privacy and around data security. And also, I think cybersecurity, we all have seen IRF. So that becomes like the doomsday that people talk about, but I don't believe that's the way forward. That would happen eventually. So what do you think are the necessary steps that you're seeing at SWACO happening from a data security and communications lens?
Yeah, I appreciate that question actually. As you have also seen in the slide, there was cybersecurity was also stated as one component of this. And so if I be completely honest, there is no answer saying that I think we should do it this way, but maybe one thing that we need to emphasize again and again, that for these solutions, especially for questions about data privacy and so on, we need to have transparent discussions. We need to have all stakeholders coming together, trying to understand each other's pain points. And only with this way, especially for the topics that are sensitive, such as data privacy, we can understand. And again, for this thing, also, when we compare different parts of the world, you have different regulations, different, how do you say, even habits, let's say. So how people approach these things are really different. But in these specific circumstances, you just have to get together all different stakeholders from all different areas, and you have to discuss openly about each other's pain points. And I think this is the way that we need to move forward to.
Interesting. So Cecilia, from your end, I would want to understand, in your presentation, you mentioned that you're looking at early adopters, wherein the private spaces are being used for autonomous vehicles, and primarily that's where you're seeing the adoption. So how are you, so based on the pilots that you've seen or observed, what do you think is the status that you're looking at for the rollout of autonomous vehicles, more from a data exchange and security lens? Because 5G is still a couple of years ahead. So if we look at 4G as the reliable bank for now, what level are you actually looking at to achieve just with 4G? And what does, any insights from those pilots?
I don't believe, that's my opinion. Of course, I probably is wrong, I don't know. But I don't believe we are going to achieve the 4th level in 10 years. So as I mentioned, Brazil is pretty huge. That is almost half of the continent, and we have several areas without any kind of connective. So I'm driving my car, and if something happens, if a tire explodes, something like that, and you don't have you can do nothing. You can call someone. You don't have any kind of connectivity to be assisted. So we need to invest in this part, and it's a little bit complicated because many of these areas are rural areas. So it's going to take a lot of time and investment, but we are going to this direction. Also in Economical, we have one of our highways. It's on the Amazonas, I think you know Amazonas region. So we don't have too much connectivity there. So and some, I don't know. We need something. It's going to have a lot of invest, and we have a lot of steps to take.
Interesting. So the one question just popped in my head, and either one of you can answer this. It's a rather open-ended futuristic question. When we talk about electric vehicles and we talk about autonomous vehicles, they are clubbed together all the time, right? And I think Tesla has kind of made that possible as a dream, that you can have an electric autonomous vehicle. Do you think we will have IC engine-based, hydrogen-based autonomous vehicles, the more complicated systems that we look at? Or how do you think, will it only be purely electric autonomous that we keep talking about? And just try to imagine a future 10 years from now, and what kind of autonomous vehicles are you looking at? And how do you see that going out?
Would you like to go, Cecilia, or should I comment on this?
You can go.
Yeah, so if I be honest, I'm not specifically working on electric vehicles and so on, okay? So I won't be able to really comment on this in a very certain way, but what I want to say overall, how do I imagine? I imagine, as I emphasized several times in my presentation, I imagine a future where automotive manufacturers are cooperating closely with cities, cooperating closely with other technology providers, and we can talk about many different solutions. We can talk about electric vehicles and so on, which I think Alain showed a really nice picture of actually, this is not the sole solution, right? I think
Yeah.
in general, it can be about anything, about autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles. We have to embrace it in a more holistic way. We have to understand that it's not black and white. It is contributing to our problems, to solve our problems, yes, but this is not a sole solution. We have to think about it from a bigger perspective to understand how we can actually solve this issue. Just implementing, asking everybody to purchase electric vehicles or owning autonomous vehicles will not be a solution.
Interesting. Cecilia, your thoughts?
It is correct to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, she was saying. I was thinking that we don't just have the electric vehicles, but we still have the hydrogen and another kind of fuels that can contribute to the low emission of CO2. So although that thing I don't remember the name, but here I think first we need to invest firstly in EV charges and all the infrastructure to attend that, and we need to invest in the connective between the driver, the car, and the road, then to achieve some kind of level 3 or level 4 of autonomous vehicles. So
Interesting.
too much things.
Interesting. And one thing that both of you have mentioned is looking at level 4, level 3, much more down the line, not much more in the coming couple of years, right? I'd like to bring up a case study that I read about a couple of weeks back, where there are factories now being completely automated with robots, and not just from within the factory lines, but intra-factory within the same facility, right? And reducing manpower. So when we talk about connected vehicles, I think the thought that came to my mind then was that we are just looking at it very movement of people, but not of goods also. So from an autonomous vehicle lens, and logistics accounts for majority of transport, if you look at it. So how do you think autonomous vehicles will get adopted in the transportation of goods or logistics space? And how do you see that in terms of not just autonomy, but also safety of goods, kind of goods? So if there are there any thoughts on that?
Maybe just a very short comment on this.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Many of the use cases also the use cases that I mentioned, and many more that I haven't had time to talk about, they're actually applicable to, as I said, other road users. So you can also implement it for, let's say, trucks that are carrying goods. You can also improve the efficiency of these services using, again, similar architecture with the same solution. So it holds, again, as I said before, it holds great potential for different road users if we once understand how it actually works, like different components and what is the end goal of this, if that makes sense. Yeah,
yes,
that would be.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, thank you. Cecilia, any thoughts from you? No? Awesome. Awesome. So let's end this with a last call to action from either of you, and it could be anything that you have in mind. And yeah, so one last final comment or any call to action rather for everyone who's listening in.
It's difficult to say one thing, but
it could be multiple.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I would mention again, we need to understand different perspectives. We need to try to look at it from other people's perspectives as well, not just the person who is driving the car or sitting in the car. We need to understand that, and just in this case, we can unlock the actual potential of such solutions, I think.
Awesome. Thank you. Cecilia, from you, any call to action?
I would say we need more government investment and more research and more people talking and exploring this area, because we are really in the beginning. So that's what I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for your time and for coming in and the amazing presentation. It's been really informative. Over to you, Ray, for the closing remarks and sign off.
Yeah, thank you for those very engaging actually topics, and especially for developing countries like here in the Philippines. Well, it will be a long way for us, but we will also take into account the benefits of autonomous mobility. So well, we're actually over time already for like over 50 minutes, so I will cut this really short. And may I request all the speakers, if you're still around, to turn on your camera so that we can also say our final goodbyes. Right. So on behalf of the International Road Federation in Geneva, on behalf also of Gonzalo, who joined us earlier and is in a meeting right now. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers for joining and for taking their time in this summit. We surely expected actually that this summit would be somehow on a face-to-face setup already, but we do look forward to have this soon in Istanbul, as said by Gonzalo, and we all look forward to actually have this kind of activity again, even next year when it's probably still going to be on a virtual mode of delivery. So again, thank you very much for joining this event, to our participants, and of course, to the leads of the IRF Young Professionals Program, of course, Shang and Talekai, who's actually here. So I'm very, very happy that we pulled this off, guys. And of course, our speakers, you're really awesome. And we really had a very, very meaningful and productive discussion. And I do hope that we could still connect even after this summit. So thank you. And again, good night from my side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We'll keep you guys on the loop.